Alright students, welcome to part 2 of our video lectures. This video is going to cover objective number 2, which we're hopefully going to understand how theory and research are connected, if you haven't started to already see how it might be connected. But before we do, let's just go over a very brief review of some theories that you've learned throughout your program, particularly in your theory class, and maybe in your program design class or some other classes that you've maybe heard about these theories. So, starting with the individual and intrapersonal theories, which theory or model has the constructs perceived susceptibility, perceived severity, perceived benefits, perceived risk, self-efficacy, as well as cues to action? Hint, this is everyone's favorite. The health belief model. There is also another intrapersonal individual theory that has the constructs behavioral intention, attitude, subjective norms, perceived behavioral control, and how all of these things help in understanding a particular behavior. Do you know what theory this is? Hint, it was one that had evolved from one to another. It started off to be the theory of reasoned action, but then that evolved and is refined through different types of research to then become the theory of planned behavior. We can understand whether or not somebody decides to do something in terms of whether or not their attitude, subjective norms, and their intention, or their behavioral control, but also how that also leads to their intention, whether or not they intend to do something or not, and how whether or not they have control over those things. And ultimately, all of these constructs can help explain whether or not somebody decides to do some type of behavior. There's also another one that has stages of change, decisional balance, self-efficacy, and processes of change. Decisional balance, right, evaluating between pros and cons. Stages of change, pre-contemplation, contemplation. Do you remember me mentioning it from the first video? The trans-theoretical model. There is one theory that you learned that was interpersonal, that has the constructs, many constructs, but a few of them were reciprocal determinism, self-efficacy, as well as reinforcement. This was the social cognitive theory. And then there was one that had to do with community, larger groups of people, had constructs related to early adopters, laggards, thinking about advertising and promotion, and thinking about how you're going to diffuse innovations. So diffusion of the innovations was the community theory. And so this was just a quick little review on some of the theories that you might be familiar with learning over the time. But when you think about a theory, there are really three major elements of a theory. First one are the major factors or constructs that influence that phenomenon. As we've just reviewed different types of constructs that help explain a behavior, some outcome, some phenomenon, those are all what we call factors and constructs that are all that we have seen also in the first video denoted as what? A cloud, a circular oval, or a square rectangle. Factors and constructs are denoted as circles and ovals, right? Because they start off as a cloud nebulous concept that is then connected and used in a theory, and thus those concepts are now considered constructs or factors. But those constructs and factors are still not measurable. So we have to operationalize them into measurable variables. Okay, so that, again, the first element of a theory are the major constructs and factors. The second element of a theory are the relationships between those factors. Are those factors related at all? And how do they influence each other, if at all, or do they just directly influence the outcome? And then the third element of a theory are the conditions. The conditions under which these relationships occur and which they do not occur. It might be in one particular instance, in one particular population, one particular location, one particular sense of time in which the relationships and how the certain constructs relate to each other might be related to each other, and other times they may not be related to each other. So let's take a look. We're going to use the health belief model. Of course, it's everyone's favorite one, and most people understand this particular theory or model. And really, what's the difference between a theory and a model? Do you know? Are you able to define or explain what a difference is between a theory and a model? Because we tend to use them very interchangeably. I'm still here, I'm just letting you think for a bit. So, models are subclasses or subgroups of theories because models usually take from different theories, multiple theories, to make sense of something. And so you have theories, and sometimes people will use different theories to make sense of something, and when they make sense of something, when they use different theories, they've created a model. So the health belief model is a compilation of different theories. And so we know that we have these constructs: perceived susceptibility, severity, barriers, benefits, self-efficacy. We also have cues to action, and how all of these things relate to a particular behavior, an outcome. In this particular case, smoking behavior. We can see whether or not these constructs help make sense of some outcome. We can ask whether or not somebody smokes. Do you smoke? Yes or no. How much do you smoke? From 0 cigarettes a day to whatever number, right? And we can also think about directly measuring these particular constructs if we have particular variables that we can operationalize. And so again, we see that the first element are the major constructs in the ovals that help influence or help explain the particular phenomenon or outcome, which in this case is smoking behavior. But the second, again, is the relationships between these factors. Hence, we see these blue lines. We know that obviously these constructs are related to the outcome, the phenomenon, but are these other constructs related to each other? Is self-efficacy related to susceptibility? Is susceptibility related to severity? If I think this thing is very, very severe, is that going to always also influence if I'm susceptible or not? Yes or no? Right? Whether or not these particular relationships exist, how strong they are, or whether or not they exist at all. Right? We can always test these particular relationships. We can always test to see whether or not these constructs also help relate to this outcome. And so we start thinking about these are possible research questions. These are possible things that people can do when we are testing theories. When we are testing theories, then we're able to test hypotheses by saying, hey, are these constructs related at all? In what way is whether or not I think smoking is a bad thing for me, and whether or not I think I'm susceptible to it, or whether or not I think it's related to the benefits, or whether or not I perceive there are any barriers to me quitting, whether or not these things are related to each other at all. So I can start developing and start thinking about what are ways that I can test theories. I can test the actual constructs themselves. I can also test the relationships between these constructs. But the last one is the conditions. Under which conditions do these relationships occur and not occur? When? Where? Under what circumstances? More opportunities for us to test these theories. Does this occur when we're children? How does self-efficacy as a child and our behavior influence our severity, our susceptibility, versus when we're older adults, versus when we're middle-aged, before and after a class? What about if you're living in the suburbs, in a low-income community? Under what circumstances can we test to see whether these conditions hold up to be true? These are all opportunities for us to do research. And so we're starting to see how these types of theories and the constructs that make up these theories and models are opportunities for us to test these theories. To test these theories by coming up with hypotheses. And we then test those hypotheses that are based on theories by collecting data and observations. And then confirming that, or refuting that, or revising these theories and testing that hypothesis by either saying, do we fail to reject the null hypothesis or fail to reject it based on the data that we have and confirming it. So, when we think about characteristics of theories, we know that we can have theories that are based on observation, based on data, based on experiments and research. And thus, what kind of research, what line of thinking, what model of inquiry are we using when we are creating new theories that are based on observation, based on research? Is this inductive or deductive? This is inductive. But then we can also subject theories to repeated tests to determine how valid they are, how precise they are. When we're testing hypotheses, testing theories, is this inductive or deductive? This is deductive, right? And so we know that connecting theory and research, when we are using theories and doing research that are based on theories, we can test them. We can test to see whether or not those theories are valid, supported, based on the data that we collect. Whether or not we can completely throw out those theories, like the miasma theory, completely rejected it, refuted it, because we found that there was a better explanation for that. The findings did not hold up. Or we can also refine it and adapt it, just like the theory of reason and action, and how that was refined to become the theory of planned behavior. And so then, we have research that is theory-based, because it is based on theory that makes up this foundation to help us test these theories, test hypotheses, conduct our research. All right, that's the end of part 2. Continue on to part 3 for the last objective.